Vampire Survivors is a roguelike shoot-'em-up where you get to play as one of many characters. It's pretty well known at this point that the developer Luca Galante worked in the gambling industry before working on this game, and boy does it show. And I don't mean this game is monetized all to hell, because it's not. There's no microtransactions, and the game itself is really inexpensive. But when you open one of the many chests you'll come across in-game, say hello to Jackpot World. You're going to feel like you've hit big at the casino, and it feels pretty good. Now, I didn't end up playing this game nearly as much as some other people I know did, but I still played it a lot longer than I ever expected. Seeing as the only real gameplay in this is picking power-ups up off the ground and walking around in circles, the game scratches a very unique itch. It's almost a passive experience, great for keeping your hands busy while listening to a podcast or something. Cubivore, Survival of the Fittest. Cubivore, Survival of the Fittest calls itself an action-adventure game, which I guess is accurate because that describes most things. But in truth, Cubivore is so much more. It's the only game I've ever seen where you can play as these cute but equally creepy cardboard box monsters. There's also an in-depth leveling up mechanic and mating system where you give birth to offspring with extra limbs, and then you play as that child for the rest of the game until you have another child. This game is incredibly unique, and it's like nothing else I've played before or since, and I think that's why it's sat with me so long. Adios. In Adios, you play a pig farmer who no longer wants to work for the mob in having a conversation with your would-be killer. These conversations take place throughout the day as you do odd jobs across your farm. And with the exception of choosing things to say, that's really the only gameplay to be had here. And that's fine, because I think the conversation being had is strong enough to carry the game. At certain times in the game, you'll be presented with grayed out dialogue options that are meant to represent things your character is thinking, but either know they shouldn't say or can't bring themselves to say it, and I thought that was a really clever way to convey what your character's thinking. It might not be the kind of game that you play more than once, but it's certainly going to be something you think about for a while. Gone Home. Gone Home puts you in the shoes of a young woman in 1995 returning to her family's home in rural Oregon. You quickly realize that no one is home, and the game is about wandering around the house and trying to piece together what happened. It's wonderfully told through nothing but objects found in the environment, and while it's not exactly unique to tell a story this way, I've never seen the primary story of a game told this way. And I've definitely never seen a game handle it so well. I do regret that I didn't play this game sooner, but when it first dropped, I think I knew I wouldn't have appreciated it. I probably wasn't mature enough. But because I've waited so long, I kind of learned a bunch about the game through osmosis, so the game wasn't as meaningful to me as it could have been. Kina, Bridge of Spirits. Kina Bridge of Spirits is an action-adventure game where you play as the titular Kina, a young spirit guide that seeks to help deceased people move on to the spirit world. With a premise like that, you might think this is a mostly narrative experience, but the gameplay is a lot of exploring gorgeous areas and finding these little guys hidden all over the place. And of course, there's combat. When you have a game that looks like a Pixar movie, you might not think there's going to be a whole lot of combat, or at least not focus on it, but there's a fair amount of it, and the game is pretty hard. Regular enemies aren't too bad most of the time, aside from a couple fights, but the boss fights are a huge spike up in difficulty, where they will really test how well you've got your block and parry timing down. This game really reminds me of a lot of games I grew up with playing on the PS2, but tweaked to fit some more modern conventions. Also, you can give the rot little hats, and that's just pretty damn cute. Stray. Stray is an adventure game set in an underground city populated entirely by robots. To put simply, It's the cat game. I feel like we've all seen the cat game. Playing as a cat is the main reason most people picked this game up, and I've got to admit, it's why I had my eyes on it. The cat is cute. It's everything else about the game that will convince you to stay. Throughout the game, there will be a few open-ended areas where they give you a fair-sized environment to truly wander around and explore, and that is where you feel you're most cat-like, and the game really shines. All of the verticality and climbing on things that you're not used to in other games, it's a real breath of fresh air. I could tell you the game is about looking for hope no matter the situation, but really, it's the cat game. Sifu. Sifu is a martial arts action beat-em-up where you take control of an unnamed martial arts student seeking revenge on the group of people who murdered your father. It's a rather typical martial arts storyline, but no other game with this type of storyline plays nearly this well. The controls are tight, every dodge and parry feels rewarding, and every hit feels impactful. Now, I do have to say, this game is hard. And while you're still trying to find your groove with this game, you will die. A lot. Every time you die, your character ages a few years, and the goal is to beat the game before you hit the age of 70, because at that point, you get a real game over. So the game essentially becomes replaying levels over and over, trying to die as little as possible in one level to hit a checkpoint, to give yourself enough years to beat the final boss. I know that sounds like it might get old, but when the gameplay is this tight and combined with a pretty good soundtrack, I never got tired of it. Before we get to the top 3, let's go over a few honorable mentions. Dragon Quest IV, Dragon Quest V, Cult of the Lamb, Monster Sanctuary, Perfect Vermin, Pico Park, The Quarry, Phantasy Star Online Episode 3 Card Revolution, Horizon Forbidden West. Horizon Forbidden West is an open-world action RPG that puts us back in the shoes of machine-slaying Aloy on a journey to the west coast of the United States. This game is a perfect sequel to Zero Dawn. It improves literally everything about the first game and streamlines everything that was maybe a little annoying. It's everything you could have possibly wanted out of a new game in this franchise. The combat is mostly the same. They've added these special abilities and a ton of new weapons, but the thing of note is they've completely reworked the melee system, and when you use it, it feels like a real action game with combos. It's pretty fun. This game is stunning to look at, and I've spent countless hours of my playtime just admiring the environments and trying my best with the photo mode. The game is filled with handfuls of memorable characters, each with their own interesting stories and unique cultures as well. There are also plenty of well-written and engaging side quests that will keep you locked in throughout your entire journey. Elden Ring. Elden Ring is the latest action RPG from developer From Software, and if you've ever seen or played a Dark Souls, then you've got a pretty good idea of what this game is. It's big Dark Souls. While sticking with a very tried and true formula of past Souls games, there are some notable changes that really sets Elden Ring apart from the other Souls-like games. Most notably, the game is open world now. It just doesn't sound like it would be a massive change, but believe me, that decision makes this game the most approachable of any Souls-like. Gone are the days of beating your head against the wall when there's a boss that you just can't beat. Sure, I guess technically you could go and mindlessly grind somewhere for a while, but no need to do that anymore either. Now when you're having trouble, just leave. Go find an area or a boss that's more appropriate for your level, and by the time you circle back again, you'll have no problem against the boss with the levels you've earned elsewhere. With the game being open world, you might think, but no. While the big open fields are big open fields or swamps, a lot of swamps, the countless caves, castles, and dungeons scattered about each feel exactly like what you'd expect from Software. Elden Ring also has a much stronger focus on magic than any of the other previous games. And as someone who always prefers melee characters, I wasn't really planning on using any, but even I found myself using a ton of spells because they're just a lot of fun. Also, I kind of lucked out by deciding to go faith build. The game treats you pretty well if you're a faith build. If you love the Soul series, then this is an absolute must-play. But if you're someone who has been tentative about getting into this type of game, Elden Ring acts as the perfect introduction. Tunic. Tunic is an action-adventure game where you play as a sword and shield-wielding little fox who wakes up on a mysterious shore. And that's everything you get to know about this game going into it. When you start this game, you know nothing. There's no cutscene or NPC telling you what to do or where to go. It just starts. After playing for a while, eventually you'll come across a page with only some of the text being readable, and that is where your journey truly begins. In every sense of the word, this game is about exploration. Walking around the mysterious world of Tunic gave me a sense of adventure unlike anything I've ever felt. It's not even close to what these massive open world games have given me. As someone who's never really clicked with a Zelda game, I kind of equate this to how Zelda fans probably feel about Zelda, and it feels pretty good. I don't want to spoil anything about it, but late game there is a puzzle that when I was finally able to solve it, it was one of the most rewarding feelings any game has ever made me feel. It's an incredibly clever puzzle. The visuals are charming and the world is designed in such a clever way that countless times you'll find yourself saying out loud, "Hey, I didn't know you could do that." It's the type of game that will always surprise you. There were early game secrets that I didn't find until a third playthrough. And I'm sure there's still a ton I haven't found. This is without a doubt my favorite game of 2022. But I think it belongs on a list of my favorite games of all time. I would strongly recommend this to anyone with even the slightest inclination to check it out. You won't be disappointed.